Welcome back to Switchstars, and welcome to this Nintendo Switch gameplay review of Besiege, a game which blends elements of puzzle, strategy and simulation, as you cobble together war machines and demolish and destroy buildings, troops and vehicles. It's a fair few years old now, this one, and originally released on Steam, but is this port of the game actually any good, and should you be spending your hard-earned cash on it? Well, that's what we're here to find out. So before we get started, I could have sworn that I've played this one before at some point in the past, and I can't for the life of me remember when or where, but I did recall the building mechanics of it and it being incredibly laggy, so I was initially very reluctant to play it, thinking that it must have been on the Nintendo Switch, which it clearly wasn't. Anyway, the main menu of the game presents you with a globe which you can rotate and select levels from, and it's a really cool way of doing so, with each set of levels displayed as a miniature diorama, but the game contains 4 islands with 55 levels in total, as well as a sandbox mode where you can build and test out your contraptions either in the air or on a variety of troops and ground-based structures. Before you get into things though, it's worth noting that the options menu also provides you with a selection of graphics settings, including performance and beauty modes, as well as things like frame rate, depth of field and motion blur. And I decided to go for performance at 60 frames, which kept the game running nice and smooth on the Switch, but it's nice to have these options available. Now the control scheme is primarily designed around manipulating an on-screen cursor, and the initial few levels act as kind of a tutorial, getting you used to the menu systems, manipulating the camera and teaching you the basics when it comes to construction. You'll learn how to slap a couple of wheels on your contraption and how to move it using the L and R triggers, but it doesn't hold your hand entirely, and in my opinion this is a great way to deliver a tutorial on a game like this, as it gives you the basics, but it's all about experimenting and discovering how parts interact with one another, and in essence teaching yourself how to improve at the game. What it does do initially though is limit your construction parts to only the ones that you're going to need to complete these first few levels, so that you're not overwhelmed with all the different bits and pieces you can use. But at any point you can hit up on the D-pad to open the entire construction menu, allowing you to select from any of the available parts. Now the gameplay in this one is focused around completing specific objectives outlined to you in each level, but like I said in the intro, Besiege is kind of a melding of puzzle, simulation and strategy, and in some levels you'll need to destroy a certain number of troops or deal a certain percentage of damage to a building, whilst in others you'll need to transport materials from one location to the next or drive over checkpoints in order to complete them. But the levels become progressively more challenging, and from what I've seen, each island appears to be themed around a specific type of machinery. I say from what I've seen because although I've already sunk about 3 hours or so into Besiege, I've only actually seen 2 of the 4 available islands, so this is more of a review of the gameplay so far. But this all stems from the amount of time that I've just spent playing around constructing and deconstructing different contraptions, and the building mechanics are a hell of a lot of fun. However, I will say that I think in order to get the most out of it, you do need to be technically minded to some degree. Now to try and explain how the building mechanics actually operate, each of your constructions are focused around a single central block, and opening the construction menu you can select from a wide variety of parts which range from basic wooden building blocks used to create your frames, to wheels, braces and armour plates. You then have a ton of different moving parts which are designed to give motion to these blocks, including steering hinges to allow you to turn the wheels, pistons, sliders and pulleys for pushing and pulling things, and cogs and gears for more complex interactions. If you're looking to take to the skies, then the game has you covered with propellers, wings and hot air balloon parts. And finally you have the weapon systems, which offer a variety of cannons, flamethrowers, rockets and bombs, as well as blades, drills and lancets, and these are of course what you're going to be using to destroy things. cobbling together a machine is a relatively simple process though. Each part snaps to another existing part, and as long as you're within the construction boundaries, you can pretty much place anything anywhere and create anything you like. But the real skill comes in with understanding how the physics system will affect things. Stick a cannon on your war machine without first placing braces on it, and it'll blast itself to pieces as soon as you fire it. Build a heavy flying machine but don't add enough hot air balloons, and there's no chance that you're getting that thing off the ground, and even the inertia created by things like spinning blades will have an impact on how your machine handles, which you must then try to understand and somehow counteract with other materials. Each piece though can be customised to fine-tune its functionality, such as reversing the direction of steering hinges, increasing the mass or buoyancy of things like counterweights and balloons, or allowing you to change which buttons activate certain parts. And there's some fantastic depth to the building mechanics in this one, with a lot of room for complexity, but they still somehow manage to feel accessible. So although I spent a lot of time trying to create complex contraptions, there were probably simpler and more elegant solutions for a lot of the missions that I completed. Now, to give you an example of some of the levels I faced and the types of machines I built, I'll run you through the wars and wins of my first few hours, and it's worth noting that anything you do build can be saved to your catalogue for later use, and you can also access the online workshop where you can load up other people's contraptions and download them to be used in your own game. To begin with though, the early levels in the game are all relatively tame and didn't require too much trial and error to work through them. I began by slapping some wheels on a frame, mowed down a few tents, and quickly learned that having two sets of steering hinges wasn't ideal, as rather than moving directly forwards, I instead precariously crabbed my way through a minefield. When tasked to blow up a wall, I strapped on a cannon and instead blew up myself, before learning that I could use a brace to reinforce it. And when faced with an army of angry soldiers, I popped on a couple of buzzsaws and made mincemeat out of them. My next mission required me to transport some boulders, and of the two options available to me, I opted for the grabber, which latches onto anything that it touches and can be detached with a tap of the X button, and admittedly my contraption wasn't the most efficient, but it did get the job done. And when faced with destroying a monument, I then attempted to create a catapult, but couldn't quite work out how to piece one together. And upon failing, I resorted to a good old cannon, which when timed right, bounced off a slider at just the right angle and fired off a cannonball to hit the target. Now things were starting to get a little more tricky after that, and up next I had a demolition job to destroy a small keep. So for this, I decided to fashion a grenade carrying war machine with 3 grenades connected to grabbers at the front of it, and 2 up top in containers, which could be tipped using a rigging of pistons and springs. Needless to say, after distributing them about the structure, there was very little left once I detonated them, and up next was another large army, but nothing that a good old lawnmower couldn't handle. I then had another monument to destroy, and this time round I decided to download a double catapult from the online catalogue, and this worked absolute wonders, a hell of a lot better than my own attempt at constructing one. But then came another transport mission, and after failing to construct a forklift that admittedly I was pretty proud of but couldn't sufficiently lift the package up to a raised platform, it was then time to dip my feet into air-based contraptions. Now initially here I attempted to create a small drone, but soon learned that a single flying block didn't have anywhere near enough thrust to lift my fat ass off the ground, so then I experimented with hot air balloons, and with enough of these bad boys I discovered that I could raise and lower my machine with the D-pad, and later found out that I could actually rebind this to the thumbstick, which made things much easier. But I also needed some way to propel and steer myself. Strapping a few flying blocks to the front and back though, activated by forwards and backwards on the D-pad and a wing panel to create drag, I was able to achieve some semi-successful flying, and finishing things up by attaching a grabber to the undercarriage, I eventually delivered the package. From here on in, the missions alternated between destroying troops and buildings, navigating the terrain to hit checkpoints and delivering goods, and I thoroughly enjoyed the time I spent modifying my existing contraptions and creating entirely new ones. Some big, some small, but there was always a sense of achievement there when my ideas came to life and I successfully achieved the objectives. I created a huge multi-cannoned war machine which I blew to pieces multiple times whilst attempting to demolish a fortress, a blade-wielding airship which I used to maul my way through another army of troops, and the game's second island focused heavily on air-based missions. But by far my greatest contraption was a bomber, which I used to take down several airships, releasing my payloads from above using a familiar combination of pistons and springs before burning the final one out of the sky with a front-mounted flamethrower. The final mission that I played before writing this review though required me to steal a huge glowing crystal, and I managed to create a winch system by connecting a grabber to a detachable block. However, the weight of the damn thing pulled my airship out of the sky, and I had to shamefully slug my way to the waypoint inch by inch. So needless to say, my time spent with Besiege was both educational and entertaining, and I hadn't quite expected the level of depth I encountered here, but I'm happy to say that I'm glad I did. While the missions themselves were all relatively simple, they provided enough variety and small increments in the difficulty of them that it forced me to iterate on previous constructions, learning new ways in which to utilise the toolkit that I've been given and identifying ways in which to improve both the functionality and manoeuvrability of them. My only real criticism of the game is that building things often takes quite a lot of time, which mainly comes down to the mouse and keyboard controls of the PC version not translating very well to a controller, so there's a lot of different buttons to learn and press, but the developers have done a good job with what they had available to them. The game itself is a fair few years old now, but I have to say it's a real shame that it's taken so long to see a Switch port with this one, and while it won't be for everybody given the level of mechanical reasoning and trial and error involved in creating some of the more complex contraptions, if you're a fan of simulators and puzzle games and are looking for something to test your brain power, then I highly recommend giving this one a go. And I'll certainly be dipping back into it myself to continue my quest to create the perfect war machine. That though just about does it for this gameplay review of Besiege on the Nintendo Switch. So drop a like if it helped you out and consider subscribing to the channel for more Nintendo Switch content. But for now, thanks to the patrons of the channel for their ongoing support and to you the viewers for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves and game on.